He got rich in the gold rush without finding gold. The California gold rush, right? It wasn't just a historical event. It was the biggest, wildest treasure hunt in American history. Thousands of dreams, countless miles, and the intoxicating promise of instant wealth. But here's the kicker. The man who ultimately carved out one of its greatest fortunes never actually found a single speck of gold himself. Think about that for a second. While 300,000 fever-blind prospectors, driven by pure greed and desperation, stomped around shouting, "Eureka!" At every glint, our guy was quietly doing something else entirely. He was buying the muddy, blue-tinged clay they scraped off their boots and summarily tossed aside. He saw value where everyone else saw worthless grime. By the time the last pickaxe cracked against the Sierra Nevada rock, he was richer than any claim jumper or lucky prospector alive, and almost nobody even knew his name. Stick around, because this isn't just a story. It's a legend you'll absolutely want to drop at your next barbecue. The disgraced protagonist. So meet Dr. Caleb Whitlock, a name that by 1847 was synonymous with academic scandal. He was once Harvard's youngest, most brilliant botany lecturer, but then he published a paper claiming what, you ask? That plants could talk to each other through root fungi. Naturally, the established scientific community, with all its rigid decorum, didn't just disagree. They laughed him out of academia. His peer reviewers scoffed. Newspapers across the nation had a field day, branding him the plant lunatic, and his fancy, bless her practical heart, promptly mailed back the engagement ring. Broken, publicly humiliated, and utterly alone, Caleb scraped together his meager savings, booked passage west, and figured he'd start over. His plan? To quietly catalog California's unique flora, far from the judgmental stares of Boston society. Then the gold rush erupted. He wasn't chasing nuggets. He just wanted a quiet canyon where the world couldn't laugh at him anymore. Spoiler alert, the world kept laughing, at least for a while, until it didn't. It's autumn 1849, deep in the middle of a Sierra Creek. The air is crisp, the sun glints off the water, and Caleb, in his worn tweed jacket, kneels to collect delicate moss samples. Nearby, a cacophony of curses and grunts fills the air as a group of frustrated miners struggle with their sluice boxes. Their boots are coated in a thick, tenacious blue-gray muck. One burly prospector throws down his shovel in disgust, griping, "This worthless mud gums up everything. Can't even pan proper with this sticky mess." He and his comrades fling shovel loads of the offending clay onto the bank, where the sun bakes it. Caleb's trained botanist's eye, accustomed to observing the minutiae of nature, clocks a subtle yet profound color shift. The wet blue clay, as it dries, oxidizes to a deep, almost luminous indigo. His heart slams against his ribs. As a botanist, he'd spent years in stifling labs, coaxing indigofera plants to yield just a few precious grams of dye for textiles. And here, Mother Nature was literally handing out barrels of the raw stuff, freely and in abundance. He dips a finger into the drying clay, tastes the familiar iron-rich grit, and a whisper escapes his lips, barely audible above the miners' frustrated grumbles. "You idiots are throwing away a fortune." The problem, of course, was that every single miner believed the treasure was the shiny flecks of gold, not the sticky, despised mess beneath their feet. The secret plan: dye equals money. Big money. In 1850, a single ounce of high-quality indigo carmine wasn't just valuable. It was selling for more than an ounce of average placer gold. And global demand? It was absolutely exploding, fueled by the insatiable appetite of Britain's burgeoning cotton mills and the textile revolution. Caleb knew this was his chance, his redemption. But he needed land, vast, cheap, overlooked tracts of land, specifically loaded with this blue clay. He couldn't tip his hand, not even a little, or the price would skyrocket overnight. So he concocted what might just be the worst sales pitch in recorded history. He'd approach miners, looking utterly disheveled, and earnestly declare, "I'm a humble medicinal herb collector, seeking mosquito-ridden swamp to catalog liverwort." The miners, preoccupied with their poker games, their dreams of striking it rich, and the next gold vein, happily deeded him what they considered useless tracts. For a few sacks of beans, a rusty rifle, sometimes just a bottle of cheap whiskey, they'd sign away potential empires. By the spring of 1851, Caleb had quietly amassed an astonishing 1,200 acres, snaking along 3 different creeks. He wasn't staking a mining claim, digging for gold like a common prospector. He was staking a color claim. He was claiming the very earth itself, not for its metallic veins, but for the pigment hidden within its muddy depths. Early obstacles. Step 2, process the clay. This wasn't just about digging, it was about chemistry. Indigo pigment doesn't simply leap out of the earth. You've got to ferment it, oxidize it, then precipitate it. Essentially, Caleb had to run a chemistry lab in a flimsy tent in the wilderness. He hacked together crude log vats, bartered for copper kettles from a broke blacksmith, and began to experiment. The first batch he attempted smelled like death warmed over. The second batch grew a horrifying fuzzy mold. The third batch produced nothing more than a sad, gray, utterly useless paste. Meanwhile, rumors, as they always do, began to swirl through the mining camps. Docs cooking up some witch potion. Kids, emboldened by their parents' whispers, threw rocks at his isolated shack. A particularly nasty local gambler, suspecting some hidden value, even tried to burn him out just to snatch the land. Then, winter hit. The Sierra snows descended, supplies dwindled to almost nothing, and his entire working capital consisted of 4 measly gold nuggets he'd panned just to buy lamp oil. Yet, he persevered. In his journal, amidst the frost and the failures, he scrawled, "Failure is simply data." Then, he'd remember the mocking laughter from Boston, the newspaper headlines, the returned ring, and he'd keep stirring. He had to prove them all wrong. The race against time. Spring 1852. The world outside Caleb's muddy operation was shifting. A San Francisco newspaper, small and unassuming, printed a tiny column that nearly made Caleb drop his morning coffee. Indigo dye fetches record prices, $20 an ounce. The very same paper, ironically, reported that California's richest gold seams were already thinning. Playing out, a wave of panic began to rise among the miners. Suddenly, those worthless clay deposits were being eyed with suspicion. Caleb knew his secret was on the verge of detonating. He needed one clean, undeniable extraction, and he needed it fast. In a stroke of pure luck, he found and hired 2 Chinese immigrants, Lin and Bo, who had a secret of their own. They had brewed indigo in Canton for years, mastering the ancient art. Together, they refined the process, bringing a practiced hand to Caleb's theoretical knowledge. They layered clay, added urine as an ammonia source. Yes, really. Stirred exactly 600 times, let the sun bake it, scraped the precipitate, and repeated the arduous cycle. On the 17th attempt, the 17th, the kettle yielded a slab of pure midnight blue indigo so potent it stained fingers for weeks. They had 40 pounds dried and ready, a yield worth more than most mining claims ever produced in a lifetime. That night, Caleb didn't just write in his journal. He proclaimed, "We are no longer data. We are destiny." The gamble pays off. July 1852. With his precious cargo carefully packed onto mules, Caleb began the arduous trek to Sacramento City. His destination, Harrison & Co., the largest mercantile exporter west of Denver. Owner Charles Harrison, a man whose face was etched with years of shrewd dealings, scoffed openly at Caleb's proposition. "You expect me to believe you stumbled on mountain indigo, Dr. Whitlock?" He challenged, a dismissive sneer playing on his lips. Caleb, outwardly calm despite his pounding heart, simply unwrapped a small handkerchief, sprinkled a pinch of his deep blue powder into a glass of water, and stirred. The liquid, before Harrison's very eyes, transformed into a vivid, breathtaking cerulean. Harrison's eyes widened, his skepticism melting into awe. He knew the European mills, desperate for this very color, would pay anything. They signed a contract on the spot. Caleb would supply an astonishing 200 pounds per month at $18 an ounce. The first check he received was for $57,600, a staggering sum, roughly equivalent to $1.9 million in today's money. He walked out of Harrison's office, feeling the weight of the paper in his hand, leaned against a dusty hitching post, and finally allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. He realized with the quiet, profound certainty that he was richer than every single professor who had ever mocked him combined. He didn't shout, "Eureka!" He just smiled so hard his face hurt, a silent, deeply satisfying victory. Scaling the empire. That initial success was just the beginning. To meet demand, Caleb needed more land, more labor, and exponentially more vats. He immediately brought Lynn and Bio in as full partners, recognizing their invaluable expertise and loyalty. Together, they embarked on an ambitious recruitment drive, bringing in 80 Cantonese workers from the burgeoning immigrant communities, offering them triple the average mining wages. This wasn't just a factory, it was an undertaking of epic scale. They carved intricate terraces into hillsides, installed complex clay pipelines to manage water flow, and constructed the biggest indigo works in all of North America. As word inevitably spread, competitors started to sniff around, trying to muscle in on his secret. But Caleb was always one step ahead. He countered by shrewdly buying up adjacent parcels of land under shell names, like the innocuous-sounding Sierra Agricultural Society. When a rival chemist tried to bribe Bio for the secret recipe, Caleb, without a moment's hesitation, burned the formula page and committed the precise ratios to memory, safeguarding his intellectual property. Production skyrocketed to an incredible 1,000 pounds a month. By 1854, he wasn't just shipping indigo to San Francisco. He was sending it across oceans to Liverpool, to Hong Kong, and yes, even back to Boston, where the very university donors who had once funded his academic tormentors now shamelessly begged him for endowment funds. The same newspapers that had once labeled him the plant lunatic now printed elaborate engravings of the Indigo King, the ironic collapse of gold. Meanwhile, the tide had turned dramatically for the gold prospectors. Gold output plummeted across the state. Mines that had once boomed now stood silent, their veins exhausted. Miners abandoned their camps, leaving behind rusting pickaxes, forlorn donkeys, and mountains of crushing debt. They had once ridiculed the lucky mud man, but the joke, with a cruel twist of fate, had flipped entirely. The very metal that had lured them west, that had promised untold riches, became increasingly common and difficult to find. Meanwhile, the humble blue color they had trampled underfoot, the worthless muck, was funding railways, building schools, and eventually even laying the groundwork for institutions like Stanford University. Caleb, who had once been desperate to hide his operation, now entertained senators and railroad magnates in his opulent San Francisco mansion, which was painted, of course, a deep, rich indigo blue. When asked the secret to his incredible riches, he would often reply with a knowing smile, "Stop following yellow rushes and start seeing blue opportunities." It was a simple truth, yet profoundly overlooked by so many. The story doesn't end with a happily ever after, not in the way you might expect. By the time of the Civil War, synthetic dyes began to emerge, rendering natural indigo less profitable. Caleb, ever the visionary, quietly sold his vast empire, reinvested his immense fortune in railroads, And in a final act of poetic justice, endowed a botanical institute specifically dedicated to studying plant communication, his originally mocked theory. Today, large-scale Indigofera farming is mostly obsolete. Yet every single pair of blue jeans you see owes an undeniable debt to the chemistry he scaled, the process he perfected. The real treasure he found wasn't a glittering nugget. It was a profound shift in perspective. So next time the crowd stampedes toward the obvious prize, be it crypto, AI, or whatever the next big thing is, pause. Take a moment. Look at the metaphorical muck they're scraping off their boots, the things they discard as worthless. One day, that discarded thing might just pay your mortgage. What seemingly worthless stuff are you walking past right now that everyone else ignores? Drop your wildest guess in the comments below. We read every single one. If stories like this, stories that make you rethink what truly counts as valuable, resonate with you, then hit that subscribe button. We drop a forgotten fortune, a hidden gem of history every single week. Go ahead and like this video. Share it with that friend who still thinks the only way to win is by playing the game exactly the same way everyone else is playing it. And hey, why not scroll back to that comment section and tell us what modern blue clay you're betting on? What's your unconventional wisdom?